My father used to have a business in maintaining the woods. It is a thing in my country. It basically means cutting down dead trees and hauling them out of the area. This meant that he was out in the woods all day, and he was allowed in places normal citizens couldn't come, due to rules by the Forestry Commission. My dad was working in the early morning when he suddenly noticed a car in the middle of the woods. It drove through a small path normally only used by the forester. It wasn't a car from the commission, so he thought it was very weird that it was there. However, my dad was alone, and it was the 1980s. No mobile phones to contact anyone. Since it was in the middle of nowhere, he decided to ignore it. He kept on hauling wood through the woods with his horse, when he suddenly heard men speaking. Now, my dad is a brave man and strong as a bear, so he decided to just take a quick peek to see what the hell those folks were doing. My dad looked around some thick bushes, making sure he could see the men. They were digging a hole. My father decided that it was something that he really wouldn't want to interrupt, and he kept working throughout the day like nothing ever happened. He made sure to keep some distance between him and the digging site. The men apparently never noticed my dad, possibly because his equipment wasn't located in the direction the men came from, and my father worked with horses, so there weren't any loud machines. It was the 80s after all. At the end of the day, my father got to the local commission office and reported it. They called the police. There was a body of a young woman buried there. It still irks my dad to this day. He was out alone there. What if the man saw him? What if he decided to check the burial ground out himself? Scary shit. When I was about 18, me and some friends took a road trip about 7 hours or so down to the Apalachicola National Forest near Tallahassee, Florida. We were going to do a little car camping, drink a few ice-cold natty lights. 18-year-old stuff. As such, we didn't want to be bothered by any park rangers, so we drove way deep into the woods. We got there, set up camp, had some natty lights, and me and the guy decided to go do a little exploring. So we walked about 100 yards from our site back to the main road, saw another path directly across from us, and started walking. Immediately we started seeing signs that someone had lived there for a while. Big bags of trash, stuff like that. Should have been a huge red flag to turn around, but 18-year-olds. Nothing could hurt us. So we get to this campsite of an older white guy living out of his van. Clotheslines strung up, cooler places around it, and a big gorgeous dog. I think maybe a golden retriever. We tried to back out, but he sees us and starts talking. He's friendly enough, asks us where we're from, tells us about some cool spots to check out in the park, and we end up chatting for 10 minutes and going on our way. I kept thinking to myself how odd it was that he gave directions and steps, not yards or miles. The guy seemed to be off balance, not stumbling drunk, but like he was walking on a balance beam, swaying side to side. And he was super excited to talk about national parks and forests, where we were from. Okay, camping part over. We went back to our tents. Fast forward 2 months, the same buddy calls me late at night and tells me to turn on the TV to the news. I oblige. I see an old dude with a van. You see where this is headed, but I did not. So I get pissed at my friend for waking me up. No, watch, he says, and then I see the golden retriever and it all clicks. What the fuck? That man's name was Gary Michael Hilton, convicted of at least 4 murders. He kidnapped and murdered a girl on Blood Mountain, Georgia, an older couple in the Pisgah, North Carolina, and a girl in the Apalachicola at that campsite not long after we left. Yes, the very same places he had been talking to us about. Obviously, we called the cops. They put us in touch with the FBI, and we get flown down to take investigators to the campsite. We pointed out every spot we saw anything, told them exactly what he told us, and showed them the places he described to us. I didn't find out until after the trial, but apparently they found what appears to be partially destroyed human finger bones in an area near the site. Had to fly down again to testify. Back in summer of 2012, when I was 11, I spent the night at my best friend Anna's house pretty regularly. She lived in a very wooded area, so her entire backyard could be considered a forest. We loved playing in it, and I practically never went inside when I was at her house. Because our entire backyard consisted of trees, there weren't many places to put things. Like a trampoline, for instance. They had to place it pretty far back in a small clearing. We were very naive kids, and believed that nothing could happen to us in the woods. We were so sure of it that we played around in them at night as well. One night in particular, we decided that we would go and play on our trampoline in the clearing. The trampoline was very old, and I was surprised it could still hold people. It didn't have a net either, which I hated because I feared I would go flying off one day with nothing to catch me. We took our shoes off and climbed onto the trampoline. Something about jumping around in the dark was exhilarating. I was having a blast, but as we continued to jump, the atmosphere changed. I couldn't tell what it was, but the woods seemed darker and more intimidating than before. Anna stopped jumping and completely froze, staring off into a specific spot in the woods. I stopped too and looked at her. "There's a person," she whispered, pointing to the direction she was looking. My eyes widened, and I turned my head to look for myself. Sure enough, there stood a tall, shadowy figure of a man. He noticed and tried to slightly hide himself behind one of the thick trees. He was still visible though, and absolutely terrifying. We both stood frozen and unable to yell out or run. We just stared at him. He was a bit further back, but we could still see every movement. He slowly moved out from behind the tree. My eyes moved to his hand, and I could tell that he was holding something. I had no idea what it was, but it made the entire situation even scarier. Anna's senses finally kicked in, and she pushed me to move, screaming for her mom. I flew off of the trampoline, making one big leap and landing hard on the ground. I was once thankful that there wasn't a net on her trampoline. Anna began to run, but I looked back first. The man had begun to run after us as well, and he was fast. I screamed like I had never screamed before, and took off for her house too. It felt like hours had passed before we reached her back porch. We threw ourselves into her living room. We were both actually laughing from hysteria, but the fear I felt in my stomach was sickening. Her mother, after hearing what happened, stomped onto the back porch and looked around the backyard. She couldn't see anything, but she yelled at them to get away while they still could. I'm happy to say that we never saw that guy again. Of course, going around the woods at night would never happen, and I hope that I will never have to experience another encounter like that for as long as I live.
I love camping, especially with friends, as it takes away the fear factor you inevitably get when it's dark and you start hearing animals making noises around your tent. This was about 10 years ago, so I was around 16 and was with two friends about the same age. We were all male. This happened in the rural countryside of the UK. We knew a nice secluded spot in the woods with a flat bit of grass. To get to it, you'd have to walk along this dirt trail for a couple of miles, and at a point you would turn off the trail and go down a very steep hill, which is very difficult to navigate, even during the day as it's so overgrown. From the path, you wouldn't know what a perfect camping spot it was. I should also mention, this trail takes you a fair way out from any roads, houses, and lights. So it's really cut off, and gives you that feeling that you're really fending for yourself. No cheeky takeaway halfway through the night. So we're all having a great time as you do. We had a fire blazing before it got dark, and we were cooking off of it, so we had a hearty hot meal before bed. It soon got dark, so we all huddled around the fire and started talking about typical teenager stuff. It was probably around 1:30 a.m. when we noticed two lights close together like eyes coming from the trail. But the lights gave off the same kind of light a torch would. Is someone holding two torches in each hand? We thought. We watched the lights for a bit, and it's shining down at us, so we can't see what's holding them. But we freak out because we think it could be the police, because it's illegal to have a fire when camping without permission in the UK. Or maybe some kind of weird monster. So we watch it for a bit and it doesn't move, and no one calls out. Eventually, we see it slowly moving closer, so we rushed inside the tent and sat still and listened. We didn't hear much, and soon calmed down, and figured it must have just been someone curious what the fire was, and went on their way. But the next morning, we woke up to the tent door open, and none of us had gotten up during the night. We looked around and saw that the grass had been disturbed coming down the hill, but we were really confused what the person did. I still get chills imagining some old creep just staring at us sleeping. I still go camping, sometimes alone as well, and don't worry too much about it happening again. I carry a handheld axe I keep next to my sleeping bag, in case I ever do get into trouble. But thinking back, I probably should always make sure I'm with company. Mysterious dual-wielding torch person? Let's not meet again.